Well, kia ora and welcome. Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome to this webinar. Ko Craig Youngaho, I'm the CEO. 2Ns, great to have you here. All of you that have joined us for lunch on the last day before Matariki. And we all get to have the day off tomorrow, which is amazing. So that's great. Welcome to the first webinar of the year when it comes to when it's general topics. We're going to be doing more of these. The great thing about them, obviously, is that we get to record them, and we're heading into a range of topics the rest of the year, such as AI, cybersecurity, and data privacy. I just want to remind people that when you registered, you would have ticked the box, I hope, around terms and conditions and our code of conduct for events. While it's a webinar, it's not quite the same as it is when you're in person, but still, you know, we're looking to treat people with dignity and be inclusive and all the things that go with that. And there is definitely, you can find that information on the website if you wanted to. So let's get into this because I'm probably Philip and I haven't had lunch yet, so it'll be after this. We know from this year's digital priorities report and from our digital leaders generally that we are pretty concerned about that we're seemingly not getting much better at cybersecurity. Despite spending a lot of time and a lot of money, it is the never-ending cat and mouse story. As I was listening to Radio New Zealand just shortly, they had that. We were talking about that, and so Philip has been involved with us for quite a few years and done webinars, etc. over time. But I attended one of his presentations recently about his stories, and I thought, what a great story to tell people and to hear a bit more about it. So Philip started in the mid-1990s in this, and he's probably the first person in New Zealand to deliver penetration testing, or as he might tell you about, white hat hacking. That means you're the good guys, I think. Yeah, and so with 30 years of hacking experience behind him, we are looking to him to share some insights into what he's learnt, what he's found, where he thinks we have significant vulnerabilities, and some of those pragmatic steps that we might be able to take. We are recording this, so if you want to see it again after it's finished, you can go back and look at it, and you can share it around as well. It'll be on our YouTube channel shortly after that. So in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to my good friend Philip, and welcome, Philip, in Wellington.
Excellent. Thanks, Craig. Let me get this fired up and away we go. Cool. There we are. Look, I think 30 years ago just really means I'm old, but let's see how we go. Look, 30 years ago, I was doing something completely different for a job. I am by trade, or was by trade, an accountant and a lawyer, and doing something accounting-wise. And I started to get a bit bored. And so they're thinking, you know, job's okay, pay's okay, but, you know, I want to do something different. And then one day a report turned up on the desk of a person I sat next to who did some IT stuff. I don't know what he did, but, you know, he did some IT stuff. One of the banks in New Zealand was looking to go online with internet banking, and it was about a year or so away. And it asked the organization I worked for at the time, you know, could you test the security? And of course, the answer was yes. Of course, we can test the security. In reality, the answer was no. We had no idea. But we managed to get some colleagues out of the US to test the security of the internet banking website. Along came a big, thick report from the US to New Zealand. And I happened just to see it on the desk, and the guy showed it to me. And I said, and well, it was not the truth, really. I can do all that. And now, luckily, people believed me. I had no IT background. I mean, I had some involvement in some of the early ISPs in the country, but really I had no IT training. I did one IT paper at university, which pretty much was a stage one paper saying this is a keyboard, this is a mouse. So they believed me. They saw there was some potential for it, and the firm I worked for here in New Zealand, plus the Australian firm, paid for me to go to the US and then work for a few months with the team that had done this work and bring all the knowledge back to this part of the world. So flew up and started working in Seattle, and then over in New Jersey, about in a place called Morristown, which is not much there, and then also about an hour and a half outside Chicago, an hour outside Chicago. Worked a few months, brought back there, and I think I probably became the first penetration tester in the country, the first person to start testing as a commercial service organization's security. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. What I do for security now is expanded much wider, much deeper. I do everything from governance and education sessions, but also the deep technical aspects as well, because otherwise I get bored. So I'm still doing it, helping out the pen test today, with literally today with some of the team, just to, pass on training and knowledge, and also, because it's interesting still. But look, I thought it's worth touching on. I thought we're going to go, what have we seen change? But I think it's worth starting on what has changed broadly in the last 30 years. And I would suggest, controversially, that the technology we use hasn't really changed. The example, the operating systems we use, 30 years ago, we used Windows NT for servers. Now we use Windows Server 2025. It's largely the same. The underlying core of it is the same. It almost looks and feels the same. We got Microsoft Office. Well, that came out 28 years ago. That hasn't really changed. So I would suggest that really we think we're dynamic and exciting and moving at pace. I would suggest actually we're probably not, particularly in New Zealand. I mean, certainly things have got faster and bigger. 30 years ago, I was probably using 9.6K baud modem, and many of us will be used to that perhaps. And things are now faster, bigger, more storage. And certainly our cell phones came smart, albeit that was 18 years ago the iPhones came out. That's quite a while ago as well. So the technology isn't changing at pace. I mean, I just got an iPhone 16 the other day. It's not that different to certainly my iPhone 4 I had 15 years ago. So the technology is slowly changing. It is a bit controversial. I think what really is changing is the business model of how we use technology, or what technology is being used for. We use third-party systems a lot more. So cloud, is obviously a good example of that. Yes, in the past we did use bureaus and outsourced services, but it wasn't common, apart from maybe payrolls and maybe some financial processing. But cloud's very, very common, and we rely upon IT a lot more now to run our businesses and in our personal lives. I mean, if I lose my phone, life's over. Just think what it would mean at work if you couldn't even access your email, and how reliant we are. 30 years ago, no, it was a novelty. We did a bit of stuff, but we weren't overly reliant. That's changed. So I think it's predominantly a business model. And certainly we're talking about cybersecurity a lot more. We are spending significantly more on cybersecurity than we ever have. We're talking about it a lot more. We see it featured in the media when there are incidents a lot more. 30 years ago, I would say even 15 years ago, we weren't talking about it much. This has been ramping up and up, and now it's a common thing to talk about. Hence why we're here today. So we're talking about it a lot more. But are we getting any better at it? Which is an interesting question. You think, the more we talk about something, the more we focus on something, the more we spend money and employ staff, we would be getting better. To help illustrate whether we are or not, I've pulled together a whole range of statistics from work we've been doing over the last 30 years. I've kept different statistics at different times just to help illustrate it, because it's interesting. Because we think about what's happened now, what happened last week, but we haven't necessarily think about what's been happening in the longer term. So let's jump straight into it. We are still poor at managing passwords. Now, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when we're doing penetration testing, so hacking our way in, might be pretending we're on the outside, trying to break in from the outside into organizations. We might be simulating a disgruntled employee or someone's got physical access. But when we emulated a disgruntled employee, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, probably even 15 years ago, 96% of the time, so almost always, we got admin access of most of the core systems, certainly the Windows environment, through guessing a password or discovering a password. And so almost always, the quickest we ever did was 2 minutes, and sometimes it wasn't much longer than that. We were really, really bad at passwords. Now, it's probably still 3/4 of the time, roughly 74%, we can still get admin access if we're pretending to be a disgruntled employee through guessing or discovering a password. That's not a good thing. It is still quite easy. So one of the most basic things we can do, what says who we are, we can still work out what passwords are. Yes, you may have a long, complicated password and with lots of different funny characters in it, but maybe that account you set up for the email server, 15 years ago, well, it's still sitting there for bad password. It's never had its password changed. Um, the focus on password management tends to lean heavily on how long a password is, how complex the password is, how often we should be changing passwords, which is probably never. But we do that because that's what we've been told. We get audits all the time from organizations, like the one I work for, but audits all the time, and they always talk about your passwords aren't long, your passwords aren't complex enough. So therefore, it felt like to people on the receiving end that, well, those must be the important things. And look, they're somewhat important. Password management's much, much wider than that. We also focus on those things because they're the easy things to change. Most operating systems, have boxes we can fill in numbers or tick something, and that's what they change. So therefore, because we've been told it's important, because it's easy to fix, we think that's what it is. The problem is that is only a small part of the issue. We still find admin accounts using poor quality passwords. So like I said, the example, you set up an account for an email server 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's still using that poor quality password. It doesn't matter how more complex you made passwords over that time, you're not being forced to change that one. Privileged access management, if I've got a high level of access to a system, we don't really differ that generally to having no level of access in terms of there's no additional controls apart from knowing the password. So once you're in once, you can keep going. We still find documented passwords everywhere. We obviously talked about passwords on post-it notes before. That still exists. I used to break into organizations legally. At night when staff had gone home, and this is probably 10 years ago, people would have often, certainly in the public sector, notebooks, hardcover notebooks or diaries. You'd go look on the inside cover, the back cover, and you'd find passwords. That probably exists less these days, given that we're more electronic, but there's still plenty of times we find documented passwords with very little protection. 2 weeks ago, went to a client, said, "Here, Philip, pretend you're someone in finance, here's your new computer, go." First thing I did was open the web browser, find the document management system. This was someone with just a very standard level access, and search the word password in their document management system. And within about 5 minutes, I had all their credentials for administrative access of their Windows environment and their core applications, because they were sitting in a file in the document management system that everyone had access to if they went and go look for it. So we're not good at protecting passwords. And we can, most of the time, extract a password from say a laptop or a desktop that's locked. We can come along, and if we've got physical access to a computer, we can still extract the encrypted password from it. It's an inherent weakness in Windows that you can fix, but we've yet to find an organization that does fix that. About 30 seconds, and while there's some very geeky technical aspects behind it, you don't actually need to know how that works. There's simple tools that are almost point and click. Common initial passwords, less common these days, but still somewhat common. Welcome, Philip. You're new to your job. Your password is winter 25. Very common, or summer 25, or Monday, because most people start their jobs on a Monday, or it might be Monday 01, because we have to have capitals, letters, and stuff. That's all very good, but what's the chance there is other accounts being created with the same password that people never logged into and therefore never changed it? My experience, our experience is it's very, very common. Particularly we got large organizations or large number of people, or where you utilize a third-party IT support company, it can be very, very common to find accounts still, and often accounts of a high level of access with that common initial password. Shouldn't be using it ever. Common local admin passwords, again, used to be very, very common. Now is less common because there is a feature, certainly in the Windows world, to remove that, but it's still there. So if I've got access to my laptop, my desktop, and I can work out what the local admin password is on it, I can then use that same password to log into every other computer. Used to be all very common. Now probably half the time we still find that. and password reset procedures. Very common if you've got an outsourced third party running your service desk, your help desk. Phone up and, hi, it's Philip, I forgot my password. It's still often easy to bypass with target accounts that are not used by general staff but might be used by a contractor. So they might say, okay, hello Philip, yes, what's your employee number? Oh, I don't know, I'm not an employee. Oh, we'll have to phone you back on your cell phone number perhaps. Oh, we don't have your cell phone number because I'm a contractor, not an employee. So then sometimes the answer is, well, Philip, what's your phone number? Give them a phone number, they phone me back. They tick the box that they phone someone back. There is a range of processes in place to vet people, but what the problem tends to be with password reset is what happens when there's an exception. And most of the time is you give that person access quite easily. So look, it's not all bad. Look, thankfully, we're getting much better at multi-factor authentication for remote access. So if I discover your password, it makes it harder, not impossible, but a lot harder to bypass things and get into remote access. Albeit, so we didn't used to have that at all. We used to find it challenging. Now it's commonplace in most things we do. But we typically find for most organizations, the MFA is not necessarily turned on for all users, just most, and there's still some, or we find it might be turned on for one remote access mechanism. So maybe for VPN, but not for others like Microsoft 365. So, we are getting better, but we're not great at it. So that's the first part. The second is detective mechanisms. So someone's trying to hack their way in. Can we detect them and therefore undertake some actions to stop them and to contain the incident? It used to be the case that we never got detected. Now it's about 7% of the time that we're trying to hack in from the outside world or the inside. Do we get detected? 7% is not a great number. We're going from the outside world. It is less likely now than it used to be to detect us, particularly as we moved to cloud more. Those detection mechanisms we had at our borders generally aren't there anymore. So we might not detect them. We haven't implemented them or they just don't exist. From the inside, we do get detected some of the times, but not very often. The problem is the detective controls, detective mechanisms we put in place are usually good at identifying blocking malware or malicious files. They're a bit like antivirus on steroids. So EDR, Enterprise Detection Response Tools, for example, they're very good at doing that. But what the tools we put in place, it doesn't tend to be very good beyond that. Think about what other attack paths or pathways someone might use to try and get access. What's happening is often we'll go and put a SIEM tool in, so a centralized data collection tool in, and outsource the monitoring to the third party, and pat ourselves on the back and think we've done a good job. We frequently see organizations like that, and they frequently still don't detect us when we're trying to hack our way in. It has always become a tick box situation, a very expensive tick box situation. Websites. So look, this is a positive when we're testing websites or web-based applications. 82% of the time, if I go back last 20 years ago, 30 years ago, certainly last 82% of the time, so most of the time we found high risk vulnerabilities in websites. Now it's significantly less common. Around 20% of the time roughly we will find high risk vulnerabilities. And those tend to be focused around what access do people have. Can you bypass the access rights? So why we've got better is not partly because we've got better at developing secure websites and secure web-based applications, but the main reason is that the underlying technology is now more secure. Before, even 15 years ago, the technologies were very bespoke. We're building our own routines and functions. Now there are frameworks that we use that are quite good, and as a result, the websites we built upon, the web-based applications we built upon them are a lot better. Where we are finding high-risk issues now, they usually relate to someone's authority not being checked every time you send something to a web server. It might be checked the first time when you're logged in, but not other times, or there are flaws in business logic. My favorite one is with something like a bank account. It may or may not be a bank account, but something very similar to a bank account where there was quite a significant flaw in business logic. You can make negative withdrawals. So I had this bank account-like account, had $10,000 in it of pretend play money, and I basically said, make a withdrawal of a negative $1 million. Now you minus a minus number, you actually get a positive. So withdrawing negative $1 million, put my bank account balance up $1 million. Those sorts of flaws in business logic we find somewhat common. The underlying vulnerabilities, the more geeky technical stuff, less so. Physical security, so while not cybersecurity per se, physical security we certainly do in our testing, in our broader testing, where we try and break into organizations, into their buildings. So far, when we're looking at medium to large organizations, 30 years ago, we were successful every time. Now we're still successful every time with fairly minimal effort. I think we've forgotten about physical security. We are very trusting in New Zealand, and trust is good, but that trust needs to be based upon something. Unfortunately, it is too easy. Small organizations like 8 to 10 people, and we turn up there, we look at a place very quickly. Medium to larger ones, the larger the organization, it's easier to get. We've not found somewhere yet that we haven't got into. And we do work in New Zealand frequently. We do work in some other overseas countries as well. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge in the US where they pull guns in and out on you just for having a funny accent. That worries us, but it's not that hard. We find that the average time to get through a locked door in a corporate commercial environment is 60 seconds, and that's about breaking anything. In our personal lives at home, it's easy to break into your house through breaking things, smashing a window, kicking a door down. That's the quickest way. In a corporate environment, the quickest way is not to break things. But it's still about 60, was used to be about 60 seconds. It's still about 60 seconds, really, no matter what. Just some common mechanisms. So, for example, the punch code combination lock, the digital lock that we see on the screen, commonplace. We've seen those on things like, I'm trying to think what I can say and can't say. Places containing sensitive evidence, for want of a better term, server rooms, communication rooms, other rooms containing very, very sensitive stuff. The average time to get through that lock is 60 seconds. There's 3 different ways to get through. They have a design flaw in them. No matter what brand, if they look like that, there's a design flaw in them. They can allow you to work out the combination. Plus, there's a couple other ways. They're designed for high throughput, low security. So for people passing in and out frequently and having minimal security. So you see them on things like, you used to Wellington at one stage, see them on toilet doors and stairwells, particularly for women's bathrooms. We need to go in and out quickly, and you want to keep people out, but it's not high security. You used to see it on KFC, between the customer area and where they worked out the back, the door, so staff could pass in and out between the back and the front quite quickly and easily. Again, low security, just to stop people wandering out the back. The problem is we put those on high security areas with low throughput. Slightly less common now, but we still see them, and they're easy to get through. The next one, I use it often because it works. 4 coffee cups and a holder. My hands are full. People open the doors for me. One organization was working on last year. The CIO said, no way will you ever get through. There's like 5 sets of locked doors to get through to his office. Not a chance. All I did was pick up 4 coffee cups, come wandering in, about 8:30, 9 o'clock, that time day when people coming to work, and people just open all the doors, all the way from the reception area through to where the area the CIO's office was, put the coffee cups on his desk. He looked up and just said, shit, excuse my language. It works well. We like to be helpful as people. Third one, picture there, stairwell door. Most stairwell doors in buildings of multiple levels have a lever handle. So your handles go up and down like this. If they do, they are fairly trivial to open in under 60 seconds. I've got a bit of wire that basically reaches under the door, grabs the interior handle, pulls it down, opens the door. Yes, it's a bit tricky at doing that at 10 o'clock in the morning, albeit we have, and people just think we're a bit weird. But again, if we're coming at 5 o'clock in the evening, hang out in the stairwell, hang out to 6 o'clock and through. And then this last example, swipe cards that we commonly have, or fobs, whatever we use to access. Very, very convenient, but roughly 60% of the ones in the market can be copied quite easily. So I might come in 8:30 in the morning as people are coming to work, stand in the lift with a reader in my laptop bag, standing next to me, which is next to your pocket, particularly if you're a gentleman, and copy your access card that's in your pocket or on your belt. Or one example, this is in Australia. I turned up on a Friday evening at 6 o'clock outside the premises of a very large financial institution. Someone came out of the locked building after drinks. I went into the foyer area as they did. I then pushed a button on the lift. The lift came down, opened up, and I got in. I couldn't press the buttons because I didn't have a swipe card. I sat in the lift for about 10 minutes. Someone else from a higher up floor called the lift up because they were leaving for drinks and going home. Lift went up. I got out of the floor as they went in, and I was in the lobby area. I had glass doors, so I couldn't go any further on that floor. But then I saw a cleaner just on the other side of the lobby area. I knocked on the door, and the cleaner, being very helpful, came out to see me. And I said, "Oh, can I borrow your access card, please? I've left mine behind the desk, and I really, really need to go to the bathroom." Cleaner was very, very helpful, gave me the access card. I took it, went to the bathroom. I basically had the equipment in my pocket to copy the access card, copied it, gave it back to the cleaner a couple of minutes later. I then had essentially the equivalent of the cleaner's access card that gave me 24/7 access to everywhere in their buildings, in this case Melbourne, and also in another city. And I spent the next week and a half physically breaking in, using the access card into their premises, and then checking the IT environment. So yeah, there's good physical security, there's bad physical security, but we've tended to forgot about it. We're just happy that things look secure-ish. Patching, so applying security fixes to address vulnerabilities, we're still struggling at it. 20 years ago, we never saw anyone that had, good patching processes in place. Now, 15, 16% of the time, we see places with, effective, good patch management processes in place. It's not common. We tend to be, fairly good at patching Windows environments, the Windows operating systems on our computers, because Microsoft's given us some tools that are quite good. But we struggle with patching non-Windows operating systems and applications, database, and network equipment, because it's not easy, and it's time-consuming, and it's not always straightforward. Therefore, we don't tend to focus on it. We have small teams. We have other priorities. We frequently also see systems that are no longer supported, so they are no longer patches. So it's generally a result of the process we use are fairly immature, and there's not good feedback mechanism. So we think we've patched everything, but there's not a feedback mechanism to say, yes, we have patched everything. Or, particularly in an outsourced environment, we have an outsourced IT provider who patches stuff, and they're also the ones that tell us stuff is right. And I'm not going to say they're going to lie to us, but they're going to tell you what they think is the correct answer. And that's not always an effective feedback mechanism. They think they're doing the right thing, and then they're telling you that they do the right thing. That doesn't necessarily sound like the right answer to me. We've got better securing workstations, so laptops and desktops, albeit desktops are somewhat uncommon these days. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, almost always we could easily get into someone's laptop or desktop and get access to all information on it. It was trivial. It was a couple of minutes effort. Now it's much less. Maybe a quarter of the time we can easily get access to all the data on a computer. And then people go, oh, we don't save. People don't save information on their computer. They save it on the file server, the document management system, SharePoint, whatever that may be. They do sometimes, but frequently they don't. So we've got the basics right. Workstations most of the time. We have encryption, BitLocker or the equivalent on Mac operating systems. We have antivirus software, particularly now that a good product comes with, say, Windows Defender is a really good product. So you don't see people buying separate antivirus software these days very much at all. So we tend to have it there. People generally don't have local admin access to their workstations, and you shouldn't. And screens are being locked after an activity. The screensavers, which used to be about saving screens, these days it's just about protecting us. We still do struggle with those securing Microsoft Office. Out of the box, Microsoft Office has some significant security issues with it because it's trying to be very flexible. It's trying to work for us at home and work for us in the corporate environment. And it's got a range of options that we can lock it down and secure it better, but we don't tend to. Application whitelisting, where we limit what applications we're allowed to run. because sometimes we struggle to tell the difference between a good application and a malicious application. We don't tend to have that in place, or data loss protection. And blocking USB ports, which are a great way to access data, we still struggle with that. So there's some things we could do better, but we are getting a lot better after 30 years. It's taken us probably 30 years to get there. Despite technology's not having changed much, but we are getting better. So look, there's problems, and it's not sounding positive in terms of we are better at security, but we're not much better at security. After 30 years, I would hope we'd be a lot better. I mean, I went back to a client last month. So a client I've regularly interacted with probably last 20, 25 years. We're still seeing some of the findings, security findings that we saw 25 years ago still exist now. Sometimes they disappeared and they come back. But why do we still, struggle with these issues? We haven't got much better security as our security functions. If we have a security team, and frequently we don't, the average in New Zealand is still 0, but have a security team, they're frequently a mix of line 2 and line 1 risk functions. So what I mean by that, so this is a model of 3 lines of defense. It's a risk management function, applies well for IT and non-IT. Line 1 is the IT people that implement the security and run the security. Line 2 are the people that set the policies and then check that we've applied the policies and standards. And line 3 is like an internal audit type function. That line 2 function is a primary function of a security team. It's established standards and policies. The line 1 people, the operational people, put things in place, run the security, and then the security team check that what we've put in place, what should have been put in place, is put in place. The problem is, while that's what that should be, that's frequently not what the security teams are doing. They're doing that line 1 bit. They're still running security. They're not setting the rules and checking against the rules. In fact, frequently no one's checking against the rules. And therefore, we miss things. We think things are good, we think things are right, but we miss them. In fact, we have limited assurance processes, limited checking processes altogether. We get in the pen tester once a year to check our security. That's not going to result in good security. It's going to find some issues and you'll fix some things, but for a process, whether it's an IT process or some other process in a non-IT world, for that process to be effective, you usually need feedback or feed forward sometimes, but feedback controls to tell us, are we doing the right thing? Are we on track? Are we where we want to be? Without the feedback mechanisms, you can't fix any problems in a timely manner. My car I drive, I go over the speed limit, it starts beeping at me. That's the feedback mechanism says, I'm driving too fast, therefore I can correct it. We don't tend to have that in security, or they don't tend to be very effective at all and give us limited visibility about what's happening. So therefore we can't correct it. Now, partly because we're busy doing that line 1, doing that doing aspect, and secondly, we haven't thought about what those checkpoints are. It's part of our business as usual processes, or things, things we might do daily, things we might do once a year. It's not here, therefore we don't have great visibility of what's happening in our environments. We over rely upon third parties. Now, using third party IT support providers, very, very common, and there's really good reasons for that. They can do things more efficiently, more effectively, whatever they may be. The problem is we trust them too much. And it's a bit like I said before, the example I had before around patching. We often think they're doing a good job because they tell us they're doing a good job. That's the only really mechanisms we have to know is their security well, is because they give us a report every month that says security is going well. There's something wrong there in terms of a segregation of duties. If the person doing something or the organization doing something, it's also the organization checking things. We find that, certainly for medium to large organizations, if you have IT support provider or providers, multiple is quite common, the more you have, the more likely that security is not that great. It becomes very fragmented. If you're a small organization, you've got an IT support provider, actually your security is probably going to be a lot better than if you're just doing it by yourself. But we do over rely upon them a lot, and we trust them, and just because they're really good at making the systems run and keep running doesn't necessarily mean they're good at security. That they may be, they could well be, but they may not be as well. And our security risk management processes, how we evaluate what risks are, and therefore where we should focus our time and our money, are pretty immature. It's very much like, yeah, this might happen. We're often focusing our resources in the areas that make the most noise rather than and present the biggest risk. My very cynical example at the moment, say we're very focused on AI because all the boards and the exec teams talk about AI. Therefore, we keep thinking that's our biggest risk. In some use cases, some organizations, it might be a high risk, but most organizations right now, it's probably not a large risk. But because there's lots of noise about it, we'll go focus on that. But that's security as a whole. It is very reactive about how we manage security, how we manage the risks. If there's a big incident in New Zealand, your Waikato DHB type ones, then for the next month, everyone's running around going, oh, could we do that? Could we do that? And then after a month, we forget about it and move on. So it's about noise, and that draws our focus. If you're in the public sector, and maybe someone says the public sector, nearly all the resources that we have are focused on a process called certification accreditation, which is a process that should exist in the private sector as well. It's a process of checking that security of a new system is robust before you put it into operation. Great process, but they've often been over-engineered and very slow. And in Wellington, where I am at the moment, I would say most security people, whether they work for a consulting company, third-party provider, or internal organization, most, more than half, this is what their focus is, which is only one aspect of security. It's a great process. Over-engineering doesn't work, particularly in a country like New Zealand, where we have small teams and limited resources, and we're trying to do things fast and dynamic. And often our operational processes, patch management, vulnerability management, two very good examples, are often mature. So often we see patch management is a different process to vulnerability management. It's part of the same wider process. But again, our processes tend to be fairly immature. That's probably the best way of putting it. Really looking at how immature we are, this sort of illustrates that we as New Zealanders, we think actually we're quite good at all sorts of things, including IT and security. This is by an international think tank that goes around the world and has an index that ranks all countries about how good they are at security. This is for Asia Pacific. We are sitting there with countries like Kiribati and Mongolia. We think we're like Australia or Singapore at security. We're nowhere near it. We are very, very immature as a nation, unfortunately. Part of it's our lack of regulation. Part of it is our she'll be right culture, which Australia has too, but they have regulation that goes with that, which helps drive things up. Singapore probably has the most regulation in ASPAC, and I'm not saying regulation is a good thing, but it does help drive some good practices at times. We are not good. We've been sitting towards the bottom for a long, long time, where other countries have evolved much quicker and faster than us. We look at countries that are developing and are often ahead of where we are from a cybersecurity point of view. So that's not great. And often, we used to ignore it because we thought it slowed things down. In fact, I'd say cybersecurity done well helps speed things up. It's an enabler to make things go faster, better, quicker, not something to stop you and make things slower, less efficiently, less effectively. So how do we start getting better? We have these problems. I personally don't think it's too hard. In reality, getting people to focus in the right areas is challenging. But I think what we can start doing is, if we mature our risk management processes, I think we could do a lot better. We could focus our limited resources, our limited time, our limited money on the areas that are the biggest bang for buck in reducing our risk, rather than what makes the most noise. Risk management isn't something that most IT people certainly have much experience with. It uses a whole bunch of words sometimes that people are unfamiliar with, and we need to translate. But it's great. We all have limited resources, particularly all size organizations. Therefore, we need the biggest return on investment. So we need more effective, mature processes rather than just taking a compliance focused or making the biggest noise or whatever that may be. I think they'll go a long way. Secondly, we need those feedback mechanisms, those assurance processes to make sure that we're on track. Because if we go off track of what we're doing with our security, or we secure 90% of our systems very well and forget about other 10 systems, then it's going to undermine all that good work we've done. So there needs to be ongoing feedback mechanisms within our processes. Sometimes they're independent, often they're not. Sometimes they're just things that we bed into processes or things that we do periodically to help validate that our security is effective and is achieving its objectives. The third area is focusing on the basics. We want to get the basics right, because again, if we don't get the basics right, we will undermine all those good things we do. And the three areas I think we get the biggest return on investment for: password management, having good passwords and protecting our passwords. So that's, again, not just about how long and complex it is and changing every so often. It's a breadth of practices around managing passwords. Identity and access management, about knowing who that person is, what access they should have. We're really poor at that. Getting that right. And then vulnerability management, identifying security weaknesses and fixing them. We focus on just those three areas and got them working really well. Now, we don't have to be perfect, but working really well. We would all, as a nation, all our organizations would be a lot better. And our detective mechanisms, we need to make sure that our detective mechanisms who look for someone's trying to hack in now, or a potential security incident here, they need to focus on where the risk is, not just a cookie cutter solution that ticks the box. You've got to have a balance of preventive measures, so things that keep people out, and detective measures, things that detect unusual behaviors or potential issues, and they allow us to react to them. Again, cookie cutter solution will work partly, but it's not going to be a great solution. I think I said before, it used to be 0% of the time we got detected. Now it's about 7% of the time we get detected. That's not good enough to stop someone. Look, I hope that's been interesting. It's what's been keeping me busy for the last 30 years. I would love for things to be more challenging, I and the team, because while it used to be just me, now it's me and a big team that does that. We far rather not be able to hack our way into systems, despite how much fun we have doing it. It's not good for us as a nation. We could be quite a dynamic nation if we got security well. We could be another Singapore, particularly with all these nice big data centers that keep popping up, and our faster telecommunications as a country. The security is the bit that's slowing us down, I think, from being a world leader, or even just protecting our jobs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philip. I think I enjoyed that more the second time round for some reason. Anyway, hey, there aren't any questions in the Q&A, but I have now turned everyone's ability to turn their microphone on if they want to ask a question. So if you want to ask a question, stick your hand up. There's a hand up button at the bottom. Chuck that up, and then I'll let you speak and ask Philip a question if you have any. See if you've got any. Maybe.
No. They're probably in their lunch. What we're about to do, yeah.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. Oh, Lana's asked one. What are your thoughts on the new cyber policy?
I'm going to go, which cyber policy? Is this the new mandatory controls that the National Cybersecurity Centre has published?
The one out this week.
I think that's probably it.
Okay.
I'm hoping, and I'll be correct if I'm not, but the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCSB, our intelligence agency, which I work very close to, I think it's good. Now, this is a set of baseline basic controls that they're expecting all public sector organizations, they're expecting a certain set of public sector organizations to have those basics in place. Our just covers 40 of the public sector organizations, but the 40 most important ones, our ministries, our departments, and a few other organizations. I think they're great, and I think they're great for private and public sector. They're very similar to other controls out there, out of best practices. We have the Essential 8, which came out of the Australian Signals Directorate, which is the Australian equivalent to GCSB. We've had that for years. We've had the critical controls coming out of the NCSC in New Zealand, the 10 most effective cybersecurity controls you can put in place. This is a very similar set. It's a little bit more detail. It's mandating it for government agencies, but it's good best practice. It aligns with all your good practice frameworks out there as well. If you are an organization near cybersecurity strategy for next year, I would pick those up, and there's your strategy already. We don't do most of those because most organizations don't do most of those well. We don't do most of those. We want to do all those. It's going to take us a year or two to get there. These are strategy done. Don't pay me lots of money to do it, because I'll reprint it for you. So I think it's really good. The only challenge will be, we had something similar 15 or plus years ago for government agencies, where there was 4 critical controls they had to implement, and most had 1 or 2 of them. But I think the focus in public sector and the focus coming from the likes of GCSB and some of the other central government agencies is a lot different these days. And us as citizens, our tolerance for failure is a lot less these days. So I think we will see them in there, because the organisation need now to report back on those into, I presume, the GCSB or will be the GCSB. So therefore, it will happen, or largely happen. So I think it's great.
Cool. All right, we'll ask one more question. Do you have thoughts about how? Oh gosh, Stuart asked a question about the usefulness of ISO 27001.
NIST and the CIS controls. Look, NIST and ISO 27001. Look, if someone's ISO 27001 compliant, that doesn't really mean they're good at security. It may be, it may not be, but it is, in my view, too easy to get compliance. It is a good framework, as is NIST, is a good framework structure to structure things around. I wouldn't try and become compliant necessarily, unless there's some industries where you really need compliant because other organizations are expecting you to be, but they are good frameworks. The critical controls, the CIS controls, sorry, again, are a good framework, a little bit more detailed. They do, however, miss out some key gaps. If I was to pick one, I would pick, as a framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, or the GCSB has their own version of that, which is very similar. It's like New Zealand variation of that. I think it's a more comprehensive framework, particularly the current version, where they split out governance, because governance is a critical area. I think that's well. But any of them are good as a structure, as a framework to base things around. If you had fairly weak security or fairly immature security, starting with the CIS controls, which are specific controls, might be a good place to start as well.
All right, this is the last question. Your thoughts about NCSC putting out the controls this week ahead of the new cyber policy later in the year?
Look, ahead of the policy, I don't think it matters, because they're not the same thing. The policy is a direction and structure for New Zealand, how we improve. These controls are critical, important controls, regardless of what exists. So they are complementary, but it doesn't really matter. The policy could say anything, and these controls that came out this week would still be the most important controls to put out, to put in place. So I don't think it matters really that one's ahead of the other.
Cool.